Hey, welcome everybody. This is the last part of the CABW Cal-SFS meeting for 2021. So right now we're going into a special session with Cal-SFS for our traditional ecological knowledge. My name is Angela De Palma Dow. I am the chair president of California Chapter Society Freshwater Science. And during every annual meeting, we try to do a workshop or a special panel, something that provides a little bit of extra information or a tool or a resource that's valuable for our membership. And this year, during some surveys, questionnaires, interactions with our members, they expressed an interest in having a traditional tribal ecological knowledge session. And we really wanted to do it in person and have some hands-on demos, building some tule boats, maybe some basket weaving. However, with COVID, we weren't able to do that. We are still planning for that in the future. When we have this meeting, we'll be downtown Sacramento. And so we are still planning for some sort of those hands-on things in the future. But for today, we have special session speakers. So we have 4 speakers today. I know the agenda and the schedule says that we are going to have 5. Unfortunately, Keith and his whole family are not feeling well, and he's not going to be here today. Our thoughts are with Keith and his family. That can be very rough, and so totally get better. Do everything that you can to get better, and then we will have just the speakers in the same order. So we'll start off with Sarah Ryden from Big Valley, a band of Pomo Indians. And then we'll have Anne-Marie Mendoza from UCLA, and then we'll have co-presenters Dr. Beth Rose Middleton from UC Davis and Ada Stevenson from California Indian Water Commission. And so the way this will work will be the first part will be the special session. And so each of the presenters will present on their field of research, field of management, some projects they're working on, things of interest to them. So we and the audience can get to know the speakers a little bit. And then the second part of this special session will be a panel question answer with some discussion. And that part will be moderated by our CalSFS fellows from this year. So today we have Robin, we have Will, Kyle, and Melissa. We'll be asking questions of the speakers, of the panelists, so we can start this discussion and learn some things about traditional ecological knowledge. Particularly for our membership at CalSFS, we want to provide some research education so that going forward, our future freshwater scientists can work collaboratively with tribes, alongside tribes, when collecting data, when working in cultural resources. And so we want to make sure that we're establishing those relationships now and providing this panel as a tool, as a resource for our membership. All right, so again, we will be having the presentations first. There are going to be about 12, 15 minutes. We have a little extra time now because Keith will not be speaking. So we will allow some questions during the first part. If you have any questions about the speaker's research or what they're working on, you can go ahead and put them into the question answer box below, and we'll be moderating that. Some of these questions we'll answer live. Some of them might be really juicy. We might want to hold on to them until we get to the Q&A discussion panel a little bit later. And some of them, maybe the speakers can answer or elaborate on types. We will take all sorts of questions and comments, and anything we don't answer during the speakers portion, we might carry over and answer later into the Q&A discussion. That's what that's for. But we will allow some questions right after the speakers talk, if it's related to their work and what they talked about. All right, so once again, welcome to CalSFS, and this will be our special session. I do want to plug some things about CalSFS first before we go on. We do have a Twitter account. We are going to be tweeting throughout the session today at CalSFS Social. Feel free to follow us. We always post any opportunities such as students travel awards, student opportunities, as well as fellowship opportunities through our chapter, as well as the parent Society Freshwater Science, the full society. And if you're interested in joining CalSFS, really easy to do that. If you are or have been a CalSFS member or a Society Freshwater Science member and you're renewing your membership, whenever it comes up for the renewal, there's a little box that asks if you want to join any chapters, and make sure you just check the California chapter box. And if you haven't done that, or you just want to join the chapter, you can email here at cal.chap.sfs@gmail.com. And between myself or John Olson, he is our Treasury Secretary, he will be able to get you connected to be a member. And some of the benefits of joining CalSFS is that we provide student early career resources and opportunities, also networking, professional growth. We have mentoring, information exchange, both with the Parent Society as well as other organizations. One year we had a session at American Fisheries Society in Reno. We were able to interact with American Fisheries Society students and other members of that organization. There's also opportunities if you're a member of CalSFS to have direct input on local events and outreach opportunities. So if there's something that you want to see in your local club or your organization and you feel like CalSFS would provide opportunities for that, this is a great way to connect and be able to make those opportunities realized. And then there's lots of other benefits I can't list here because that would just go on and on. And if you want to support CalSFS too, so we can provide some of these resources for our students' early careers, you can directly donate to our Venmo here at CalSFS-John.Olson. He is our treasurer. Or you can also email him to donate directly to him in other ways if you don't have Venmo. And again, the donations provide things like student poster awards, student travel awards, things that are useful for our memberships to grow, to expand, and so can make sure providing opportunities for those that might not otherwise have them. All right, so this is the breakdown. We're going to go into the first part of the session here. And I just want to make sure that our first speaker is here, and that is Sarah. We are like a few minutes early. So Sarah, oh, I see your face. Great. Okay. So again, this first part will go until about 2:15, and then we'll have a little break just so we can set up the panel. And if you have any questions, we can, put them in the box at any time, and we can touch base on them again during the Q&A, unless you have a question specifically for the speaker and some of their research or some of their projects, and then we'll have some time after each speaker for them to be able to address audience questions directly. And yeah, questions in the Q&A box, and I think we're ready to go. Let me make sure I'm not missing the next. Nope. Okay. So Sarah, I saw your face, and I also just want to make sure that, yeah. Okay. So we'll have you, I'll stop share here in a second. So this, our first speaker is Sarah Ryan. She's from Big Valley Band of Pomo Indians. And her talk is going to be Clear Lake Tules and Beyond, Collaborative Tribal Beneficial Use and Development. And Sarah works around Clear Lake, which is near and dear to my heart, which is where I work. So little biased having you first, full disclosure here. But we both love Clear Lake. Sarah's been working there for a very long time, and I'm really excited to learn about her work with Tules. And, Sarah, we will have you come back when we meet in person, and we can have a demo on the Thule boat building. I'm really excited about that in a future year here. So I am going to stop share.
Thank you, Angela, and it's wonderful to be on this in this meeting and presenting on tribal beneficial uses and Tules and the work that is happening on Clear Lake. As Angela mentioned, the original plan was to have one of our elders here, who is also a Thule boat builder, to come and do a demonstration for all the participants. And to really give that visual and sort of hands-on experience along with a talk, because until you see Tules, until you see the plants and the animals and the lake, it's a lot of this is just words and kind of a description of what we're doing. So I really look forward to, and I know the elder who was really sad that this, this wasn't going to move forward in person. Definitely looking forward to doing a hands-on thing next year. But today what I was going to talk about was some of our research on Clear Lake and the work that we've been doing collaboratively with other tribes and also agencies, including the one that Angela works for at the Lake County Department of Water Resources. What you see, the reason why this is titled Clear Lake Tules is because this plant that rings Clear Lake, or at least used to ring Clear Lake as, thick marshlands, this plant is so important to the Big Valley tribe that I work for, and I've been lucky enough to work and fortunate enough to work with them for the last 20 years. But this is such an important plant for so many reasons. It's consumed it's used in ceremony, it's used for pollution prevention purposes, it's used for tule boats. And you see a picture here during one of our annual tule boat festivals of a little girl who's playing with and engaging with the tule boat during one of our festivals. But as I mentioned, today I want to talk about some of our programs and projects that we're doing on Clear Lake. Because this is a group that might be new to tribal programs, I wanted to give some background on that. We are going to, there's a lot that tribes are doing, a whole lot, and not a lot of it is necessarily shared with just kind of the general public. So it's good for you to do your research. If you're wanting to reach out to tribes, do your research and find out about that tribe. And when you approach a tribal government, it's always good to have some additional information about the tribe. So we're going to talk a little bit about tribal beneficial uses and some programs and projects that we have on Clear Lake. So just some background that there are 109 federally recognized tribes in California. There are still many more that are also petitioning to get recognition. And they are in most counties of California in terms of the federally recognized, but tribes throughout California have traditional lands. And here's a map of California with the traditional lands and language areas of the people. And you can see it takes up the whole state, of course, and the tribes, the tribal territories that you see on this map are very much still present. And where I am and where Clear Lake is in the Pomo area. So you hear about the bands of Pomo Indians, and that is something, there are Pomo tribes in Lake Mendo and Sonoma counties. So tribes are self-governed. Here is just some language from the Tribal Government Affairs website. But you don't, they're not a homeowners association. They're not an environmental club like the Sierra Club or something. They have statutes that support the work that they do with the federal government, and they are sovereign nations. So again, as I mentioned, when you look at the work of tribes and you look at the things that they're trying to protect, it is based on taking care of their people and their resources as a sovereign nation. Tribes have water monitoring programs. Not every tribe. That might not be the priority of some tribes. In some tribes it is. If you're getting any sort of federal monies, you have to have a quality assurance program plan, a QAP. So the data is something that's not only legally defensible, and that's important in the eyes of the funding agency, but it's also something that is used now more than ever in the reviews that are happening, the evaluations of the water quality in California. Tribal water monitoring programs can be funded with a variety of sources. I've listed some of them there. And their data, the tribal data that is supported by federal funds is put into the Water Quality Exchange, which is a federal water database. The state CEDN ultimately feeds into the Water Quality Exchange. So the monitoring programs are also used for tribes, of course, to assess their and evaluate the water quality based on the standards and the impairment thresholds that tribes have. But you can see that it all leads into a way to assess whether tribal beneficial uses and other beneficial uses of a water body are being met. With tribal uses, it's not like if there's a ceremony that's supposed to happen, it's not like they can just postpone it necessarily for 3 weeks until the water clears up. Ceremonies and uses, tribal uses, are site specific and time specific. And this is one of the reasons why it's so important at Big Valley and most likely other tribes as well to do water monitoring programs. So you have that information. In 2017, the State Water Resources Control Board adopted a resolution that includes tribal beneficial use and subsistence fishing consumption uses definitions. Here are the definitions, and they are now being integrated into basin plans, which are basically where the water quality standards live throughout the different regions of California. And these definitions were worked on for a number of years by tribes throughout the state to make it broad enough for tribes to find those ways to ultimately come up with some water quality standards to protect their uses. Right now, except in Region 1, there are no uses on water bodies in California that will protect tribal traditional uses. And that, as I mentioned, tribal traditional uses can look, because they're site and location specific, they can look really different from what's currently protected. Oops, let me go back one. So we created a graphic. Hopefully we're moving to that. We created a graphic about a freshwater harmful algal bloom and how the toxins can impact a variety of activities that are happening that are traditional cultural activities of a tribe, and how that toxin can be the different routes of exposure for the cyanotoxins. And just put any pollution that's in the center, or put that in the center of this picture, and you can see that exposures to pollution is something that is can be much more extensive than what's currently protected for recreation. And as it lists here, ingestion of water, ingestion, inhalation of particles, or skin exposure. There's plants and animals that are being eaten that nobody thinks of. Like, for example, the tules. The tule is something that's consumed. There are also herbicides that are used on the lake that have been found in the tules of Clear Lake. That's something that we have communicated to the agency that is doing that herbicide application. They did do a risk assessment based on that, but knowing what pollution is out there and measuring for it is one of the ways that tribes can get a handle on and start to change that the management of a watershed and of a water body, because these uses should be protected. I want to go a little bit into our cyanotoxin monitoring program, cyanobacteria monitoring program. Big Valley Bandapoma Indians and Elam Indian Colony started it in 2014 on Clear Lake when they realized that, there just wasn't enough information out there about what the toxin levels were. We used a variety of sources of funding. And as you can see from these couple of pictures, it was quite concerning to see a lake that's blue and frothy with dead fish in it. That's something that we've experienced now multiple years in a row in various parts of Clear Lake. So again, to protect the uses of a water body and the tribal beneficial uses, we started this program. And we know, based on our studies, that cyanotoxins can impact tribal uses as well as other uses. So exposure is one use. Fish consumption, we did, and I have a couple slides on that. We did a cyanotoxin study on fish and shellfish on Clear Lake and found that many of them and certain species were above the guidelines for fish consumption. And that was at a sports fish level. Subsistence consumption is even more. There's 65% of the county gets their drinking water from Clear Lake. So this pollution, cyanotoxin, is something that impacts thousands of people in the county, including tribal members. And and particularly when you have cultural activities that include swallowing water, a deliberate swallowing of water, you have to be concerned about toxin levels. We started a task force, so in a collaborative manner, we worked with, and have been since 2014, working with local, regional, state, and federal agencies to stay on top of cyanobacteria and cyanotoxin issues, really support the research that's going on with outside agencies now, and also support the work that we're doing to try to limit what's causing the cyanobacteria, which is nutrients, both from the past that are now sitting at the bottom of the lake to things that are still coming in with stormwater. There's some pictures of a bloom that looks and smells like raw sewage. We identified some locations that were tribally important, as well as where some other activities occur to develop our cyanotoxin monitoring program. And we are sampling at more than 20 sites around the lake. We also educate the public, and by doing that, we're also helping the public understand why it's important to protect these uses and these plants and animals that are so important to the tribe. When you've got toxins and when you have an overabundance and a bloom of cyanobacteria, it's something that's impacting everybody. And over the years, with thousands of people that are reading our outreach, they've come to the same conclusion that we have to find some solutions to this and to be engaged. We also issue advisories to our members about toxin levels. We do have a lot of research that's going on about cyanotoxins. We've found that the health threshold exceedances are happening in certain areas, mostly the Oaks Arm. We have areas that don't really have toxin levels of any importance, and that's in the upper arm. It's rare when we see toxin levels that are above the health threshold. Here's a few slides about our fish cyanotoxin study. Again, it's to protect the tribal beneficial use of consumption. We collected 44 fish and 49 shellfish in multiple areas, and here's our cyanotoxin results. We found that we actually looked at fish from 4 different years and found areas where there were exceedances in terms of the health thresholds, in terms of season, in terms of species, and even not in terms of the arms of the lake, but we found that the higher levels were in the upper arm of Clear Lake, which is not where we're finding the toxins. And we're doing this because we want to know, is it safe to eat the fish of Clear Lake, especially the native species that are of importance to the tribe. Some other projects that we're working on, we got a Bay Area Council Climate Resiliency Grant where we've installed some time series sondes to have better information on Clear Lake and the water quality. We've done some work on fish kill observations and interagency fish kill protocols to inform our local partners about just to get on the same page when there's a fish kill in terms of tracking it and also communicating about it. We also have a couple of projects I'm going to go into, CalWatch and our wells in Clear Lake Hitch. Here's a few things from the Bay Area Council grant. We have a citizen science, and you can actually look this up now, citizen science, harmful algal blooms and fish kills. This is a free 3-part training. This is level 1 that will talk about eutrophication, harmful algal blooms, cyanobacteria, big valleys programs, and this is something that we're going to very soon start encouraging everybody to join if they'd like to. Here's some of the topics that are being covered in our Udemy classes. And this is where fish kills are being linked to our website through the iNaturalist program. And this is a way to get more people engaged in identifying fish kills. Our CalWatch program is a CDC grant that we're doing with Tracking California to look at the tap water. Again, the users of Clear Lake being drinking water users, as well as other uses. We wanted to look into what kind of contaminants people who are on their own private systems were being exposed to. So we communicated with the county and the California Department of Food and Agriculture to look at herbicide treatments on the lake, as well as, so we were able to do herbicide tap water testing. We've also, because of the cyanotoxin levels that were occurring on Clear Lake this summer, we had the highest value that we've ever had in terms of this liver toxin, microcystin. But we were concerned about our tap water participants, that all of the people get their tap water from Clear Lake that are on their own private systems. And so, and because we had seen some really vulnerable drinking water systems of these private systems, that 45% of them had total coliform present, 57% had cyanotoxin present, although 89% of the intakes had cyanotoxin present. We reached out to the public health officer, again, in a spirit of collaboration with our projects, and let them know that we thought that they needed to do a health advisory for these private water intakes. And so this is what you see on screen is an example, or is one of the press releases that went out, where we actually were able to help get fill stations for drinking water for these private intakes that were on Clear Lake in these 2 areas. And And it's still, health advisory is still in effect, but it will be released shortly is what I understand. So in summary, just a brief look into some of the programs that we have at Big Valley. And just to let you know that there are tribes in, I have Northern and Central California, but Southern California as well, tribes throughout California have some strong monitoring programs because they're taking care of their beneficial uses and the resources that are so important to cultural and traditional ways. And when you look to tribes, remember this, remember that they're watching, they're paying attention, and they're very active and engaged in protecting their resources. So remember that whenever you can and always, to look at the tribal programs and to look at tribes and bring them into the work that you're doing and help to support the work that they're doing, because we'll all be better off because of it. And thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Really great presentation. That's a great summary. I've always, because we work on the same system and we sometimes attend the same meetings, I see little snippets of your stuff for that meeting, but to have it all together in a summary, it's just great to see all the work that's going on there. I did have a question, and of course, any of the attendees, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A box down there and we will get to them. But I had a question because, so your work expands, obviously beyond your tribe, but how have you felt received with the public, with getting trust in the public and all of the scientific information that's going out, and how has that been received, and is there things that you've had to do to establish more trust, or do you feel the public has that trust for that information? Particularly right now with science, it seems sometimes is really questionable, and people are wanting to do their own research, even though, you've done research for 20 years on this, so you would know what's going on and would be a trusted source. But how have you been navigating that with this breadth of research and data and concepts that you've been working with and being very familiar with, and basically the expert now for this system particularly?
I think it's a great question, Angela. And part of why we've been really pushing outreach and education is so that the public can come to their same conclusions. We hope the same conclusions, that not only is it possible to have high toxin levels in certain parts of the lake and contaminants in certain parts of the lake and the plants and animals of it, but also that there's a need to continue monitoring. And you're right. What we found in the beginning was that people were like, what are you doing? What is this about? And it's taken a few years to really get to, I guess, convince them that this is the tribe engaged in some studies that are of importance to them. And, a lot of what I hear, though, from the public is if they want anybody to be in charge, it's the tribes. They see that this is not for profit, that this is not for, to try to sell something, but it's really to better govern the watershed. So I love the fact that people are, that a lot of the feedback I've heard from people is that, hey, we're glad you're doing this because somebody needs to. So it's been a positive experience in the long run.
And that's a great reward, right? That helps to keep going day out when those days are really rough. We get those bad blooms, is getting that positive feedback. And people appreciate what you're doing. So that's great. We do have a question here. So are the vast range of parameters tested in the same sites along the lake? And then how are those sites chosen? And then is the monitoring done by folks who are Indigenous? And have state agencies done anything with the data from the WQX yet? They're saying that they recognize that's a lot of questions. You can choose one or all of them. We do have some time because it is 1:30, and because we don't have Keith today, we have Anne-Marie was scheduled at 1:45, and Anne-Marie might bump you up just a little bit. So Sarah, I think you definitely can answer all those questions if you would like.
Yeah, sure. I'll definitely give it a shot. So the parameters that we're testing, so we have a Hawk Hydro Lab, and we are doing water chemistry at every single one of our sites. That's just our cyanotoxin monitoring sites. We also have stormwater sites. We have creek sites. We have lake sites that are protective of the tribal shoreline and whatnot. But we're always using our hydrolab and a fluorometer where, well, the hydrolab now has a fluorometer. So we're looking at phycocyanin and chlorophyll A, dissolved oxygen, temperature, pH, salinity, specific conductivity, resistivity. We have the time series sondes that we have fixed in a couple of locations on the lake are testing for most of those, including, I guess they're testing for most of those. So we do see that water chemistry is an extremely important thing to analyze. There are water quality standards associated with those, with the water chemistry. We have not done much benthic macroinvertebrate testing, and it's something I really want to include in our work. The sites are chosen for the cyanotoxin monitoring. The sites are chosen, as I mentioned, some of those are tribally important sites where there are activities going on. We reached out to the tribes of Mendo Lake and Sonoma counties to discuss and identify the sites they thought would work best for the different uses that are happening on Clear Lake from the tribes outside the county. And they settled on 3 sites that are all actually they're in the Oaks and upper arms of Clear Lake. So the rest of the sites were chosen. We were looking at a variety of, to design the study and program. We looked at a variety of information and criteria, such as we wanted to situate some sites where tules were. We wanted to situate some sites near septic systems. And then also a lot of them are in public areas where it's easy to access and controlled by either the county or the 2 cities. The monitoring is done by, we do have Big Valley members who are on within the environmental department. And so it's a combination of Big Valley members and staff of Big Valley. With Elam Indian Colony, their monitor at the time was their environmental director. They've had a couple of environmental directors since we started the program, and they are not native. We do have an internship that we've started at Big Valley for tribal members to be engaged in this, and we have been actually going down to the lake and looking at water samples under the microscope and working with the hydrolab. So there are some activities that are going on with that. State agencies done anything with the data in WQX? Yes, fortunately, this last 305B evaluation that occurred for Central Valley did look at the microcystin data from both Big Valley and Elam, and it looks like Clear Lake is is listed in the 305B evaluation or the 303D listing for microcystin, as well as some of our other data. So yes, the state agencies are using it, but it actually took years to kind of convince that to happen as well. I guess I think I've answered all your questions.
Yeah, good job. So we'll give you we got more questions in, which is fine. We have some time. So the next one is if you have additional thoughts on the higher fish microcystin concentration that was in the upper arm, despite it having lower overall cyanotoxin concentration. So it seems kind of the fish had higher concentration in the part of the lake that had lower concentration, right? And is it potentially due to lower productivity in these areas and therefore less dilution of the toxins compared to the Oaks arm, which is usually, for those not familiar with Clear Lake, the Oaks arm is usually where the majority of we see higher bloom, higher cyanotoxin concentrations, or do you think there's something else involved?
Well, it is actually specifically related to the fact that we are able to get a lot of shellfish samples in the upper arm, but not the lower and Oaks arms. And the shellfish had just a higher percentage of the shellfish had cyanotoxin levels. If we're able to get funding to do this again, we will be expanding on shellfish collection at both the Oaks and lower arm. We tried. In addition, we had some of our samples were older and therefore kind of questionable in terms of, whether they had the full concentration of cyanotoxins or not. But anyway, we did also share the data with OEHA and want to be able to continue this program of testing the fish and shellfish for cyanotoxins in the tissue and in the liver, and hopefully be able to come up with a fish advisory if it's warranted. We are also asking them to develop a subsistence consumption guideline, because right now their guideline of 10 nanograms per gram for microcystin is just for sports fish consumption, which is 1 meal a week.
Great. And we'll do another question. So great talk. Has anyone looked at how water currents in Clear Lake may influence the location and density of cyanobacteria? And just to give some scale, Clear Lake is a huge, huge lake. So there are a lot of currents out there. And each arm, there's 3 arms, have their own kind of microclimate with wind patterns and stuff. You'll be on one side of the lake, you'll drive to the other lake, and it's like completely different. No wind, totally different environment. So just to give that backup for that question.
Well, yeah, and the lower arm of the lake is where the dam is, so water is releasing out of that, and it is kind of like a drain. We are looking at the trends of how the different arms are over time have the higher toxin levels, and the currents are actually being studied by UC Davis, I believe, in terms of how how the nutrient driver or how nutrients are being driven around on the lake. So yeah, there are some studies going on regarding currents.
Okay, great. And I have one more question before we'll go on to Anne Marie. Is how would this monitoring program be affected if the Central Valley Basin Plan included tribal uses? And I know this is something near and dear to your heart that you've been working on. So I think this is a great last question for you. And then heads up, some of the other questions that were submitted, I actually really like them for the panel. So we might save some of those questions and we'll answer the panel as a group after at about around 2:15, 2:30-ish.
Yeah, I think, it's surprising, but monitoring doesn't necessarily occur on water bodies. I mean, there has to be funding for it. Somebody has to develop it. And I was really surprised to find out that even though there were water quality standards for Clear Lake, and there were all of these beneficial uses that have been adopted, it didn't mean that there was any monitoring going on regarding E. coli levels or pretty much anything else except for what the surface water purveyors were doing on Clear Lake. So would our monitoring program be affected if, I think it would just be a little more supported, because beneficial uses should be protected partially through monitoring. But again, as I mentioned, it doesn't necessarily happen. And most water bodies in California are not monitored for cyanotoxins or anything else.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. That was a great talk. Great questions answered. Really appreciate all that you're doing here on the lake that I work with too, but also in general, the information that you're providing for projects across the state. So really appreciate it. And we'll get in touch when we can meet in person, and we'll do those Thule boat building workshops. I'm super excited for that, and I cannot wait to drive down to Sacramento with all those toolies that we get to put together. So thank you so much again. So thank you. All right. So our next speaker is Anne Marie Mendoza. So Anne Marie will be talking about bursting through concrete, Indigenous water planning. And I pronounced this incorrectly before. So how do you say that?
Tonvangar.
Tonvangar. Okay, great. Thank you so much. And it looks like you're ready to go.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Special thank you to the Society of Freshwater Scientists for inviting me to this very important conversation. My name is Anne Marie Mendoza, and I'm a Gabrielino Tongval tribal member. And I also just started my 3rd year in the urban planning department at UCLA. My ancestral is now known today as what is known as today as Los Angeles. My people called this place, which is the Los Angeles basis, Tongvangar, which translates into the Tongva language to mean the world. So the geographic space that you see below my name is the entirety of the Los Angeles basin, which is our territory, which includes parts of San Bernardino and also the Southern Channel Islands. When I first began my PhD journey, I really wanted to understand the functions of power within my homeland. Los Angeles is a lot of things to a lot of people, but it is seldom recognized as an indigenous space. And who gets to make the decisions about land and water projects is ultimately kept from tribal people and participation. So through my experiences as an organizer, then turned planner, and now a researcher, I realized that urban planners have a lot of power in dictating the visions for my homelands. And if I was serious about creating political change, I needed to question and interrogate planning as a practice and its theories. So the perspective I offer today is, documenting that journey that shaped my academic study. I am a Tongva tribal member who is going to school in their homelands, and I'm dedicated to changing the hearts and minds and values of the people who now call Los Angeles home. So as an organizer turned planner, that has shaped the academic study that I facilitate today. I have spent most of my time navigating institutions and engaging with city politics to understand and combat modes of exclusion that my local tribal nation faces within Los Angeles. We are a landless, state-recognized tribe, so we have barriers to our sovereignty that federal recognized tribes do not have to contend with. A lot of the work that I have been involved with is in advocating for Indigenous representation in water planning, and in my quest to build capacity for tribes to participate in water planning, in particular planning for the Los Angeles River, I've encountered many barriers. And I guess that's what ultimately inspired the name of my presentation today, Bursting Through Concrete. Concrete for me represents the tools of colonial planning that exerts power and control over land, water, and ultimately Indigenous people. My people are relegated to being a radical minority in our own homelands when it comes to planning the future of waters. Planning scholar Libby Porter has helped shape my ideas about planning and helped me realize that planning is not natural, but a cultural artifact of colonialism. Planning sees itself as scientific and rational, and it works for the generalized ideas of what public good is, but is actually political and social and reproduces relationships of power. Our traditional ecological knowledge is very much channelized and controlled, just like our rivers. So for me, the Indigenous water planning movement that is going on in my homelands right now is really trying to break through what the colonial planning process has thus been, which has been erasing and tokenizing our participation. On the screen to the top left corner, we have what is the infamous LA Aqueduct that enables us in Los Angeles to be physically and intrinsically linked to the Owens Valley, a region that was formerly named Paiute Hunadu, which translates in Paiute land where the water flows in Paiute. But after the city of Los Angeles entered the Owens Valley in the early 1900s, the water does not flow like it once did. And the lower picture on the bottom is what is now known today as the Los Angeles River, which is a sacred river for my people, and currently going through a vast revitalization effort. And both of these built environment planning projects will be discussed today. So today, I'm going to cover two things, which is establishing the methodology of working with tribes that I was able to really think through when I developed the Aqueduct Between Us, which is a 5-part social justice series about water in Los Angeles from an Indigenous perspective. And then the second part of my presentation will be about what Indigenous water planning is to me and how the first part of my research really shaped the second part, which is, how to really work with tribes in establishing visions for our homelands. So I did not grow up with the critical consciousness of where my water comes from. And this is pretty normal in Los Angeles. People, turn on the tap and the water's always there. So we have really no reason to question that. A lot of my research has shown that people, use media to understand it. Chinatown is still something that people believe shape the narrative of water in our homelands. People in Los Angeles do not have the connection to water and land like they need to or they should. And it wasn't until I went to college that I understood why this was the case. I was able to understand how settler colonialism functions in terms of erasing Native presence on land in order to make way for settler propaganda and values. And as you peel back the layers of historical erasure that we experience in Los Angeles, we come to find out that water infrastructure projects, are major sources of dispossession for Native tribes in LA. So as I was radicalizing myself during the time of Standing Rock, I was realizing that a lot of people in Los Angeles wanted to talk about water issues from far off places and didn't really necessarily even understand where we were getting our water from here. I had the privilege of hearing a Paiute Shoshone guest speaker come to one of my classes at UCLA and teach me the history of water in my own homelands. And what I learned from that guest speaking time was that Los Angeles helped carve out 3 reservations in the Owens Valley. They established the Big Pine, the Lone Pine, and the Bishop reservations, and which the water rights were never exchanged, and it was to be determined at a different time. I also learned that, the breakdown of where our water comes from, 29% from the LA Aqueduct, 57% from the Colorado River Basin. And, I felt very motivated during that time that people in my homeland need to know where their water comes from, because in Los Angeles, 2/3 of the voting population needs to pass any resolution to do with water. And I thought that, knowing the basics was the most important part. So as a very motivated undergrad, I organized Aqueduct Between Us, a social justice water symposium, and I invited cultural teachers, water coordinators, and activists from the Owens Valley to come down to Los Angeles and explain to people of Los Angeles about their history, about the current political problems being had with the LA Department of Water and Power. And, this was a really great event, but it was very eye-opening that it just wasn't enough. And that at this point, I decided to keep establishing my relationships with this Paiute community. And it was really great, but I didn't know at that time what this would all lead to. I just knew that I wanted to be a responsible person in LA using water. And ultimately, this led me to creating a film with my brother, who is a film student. And we worked on this project for about 2 years. And we had a total of 9 participants, 5 from the Owens Valley and 4 from Tongvangar, that came together to tell the history of water in Los Angeles. And it's in 5 parts. It's very digestible, short series of film. I thought it was very important that people in Los Angeles do not have a chance to learn about where their water comes from. And it's so important that Indigenous people get to lay out that history for them. So it is during these 2 years that I learned the importance of relationship building, which ultimately helped shape the research that I'm doing today. And, relationship building is not something we're taught in school. And working with Paiute tribal members, I've come to realize that elements of our relationship are directly influenced by our relationship to the land. If our relationship to the land is one of ownership and extraction and exploitation, our predominant social relation will reflect that as well. So if our relationship that we foster is one of compassion, generosity, humility, reciprocity, that our relationship to each other will reflect that as well. Making the documentary really opened up my eyes about methodology and how we should engage with tribal communities who are not our own. So I'm a tribal community member, but I'm also an outsider to Paiute. And collecting oral histories is something that isn't necessarily regulated by the institution. So I had to build in my own protocols of how to collect stories and to building these processes of consent, which ultimately has helped me shape the research that I'm trying to do today, which is establishing Indigenous water planning protocols. So like I stated before, for me, Indigenous water planning represents a disturbance in colonial planning, which is extractive. It's based on ideas of development and ownership. And, Indigenous water planning is the opposite of that. It is based on TEK TEK for any given water planning project. And that is something that I was able to get from the participants of the documentary, how to prioritize that within our storytelling, and then hopefully to being able to prioritize it in the way we plan. What I really took away from my elders, some of whom have passed, is that water is not a resource, but a relative. And I am excited to think through in the future about how does that look when you use that as a basis of devising a river plan. I also learned through my processes of interviewing various tribal folks is that Indigenous people have the right, but also the ancestral obligation to shape the water futures in their homeland. So people where I'm from in my tribal community, we're not even at that point where we get to carry out any type of projects or to test our waters or to even be asked what we want for our rivers. We're very much in this beginning stage of politicizing the rest of the people around us because we do not have a land base. So therefore, we do depend on building out coalitions with people. And I think that's where a lot of my work is coming from, is how to make our message of our knowledge the main hegemony in Los Angeles. Through my processes working with the people, I also developed processes of consent, which I based on the principles of free, prior, and informed consent, which is something that is reflected in the United Nations Declaration of Rights of Indigenous People. And I love the language within that document because it says that Indigenous people have the right to withhold their consent for any action that would affect their lands, territories, and rights. And when I made this documentary, before I released it to the public, I made sure that all the participants consented to the ways in which that their story was told. And this is something that took long time to make sure that people really appreciated and also felt appreciated and felt that their story was being shared in the correct way. And oftentimes when, researchers are working with tribal communities, there's no processes of consent that are built in. And I think that that's something that needs to be talked about and needs to be put forth when we're talking through these planning projects concerning water. And then a big anchor of what I think Indigenous water planning could be and should be is reciprocity. So with the project, the Aqueduct Between Us, there is a written portion that I did for my thesis where I try to break down the laws and understanding the various policies that affect the tribes in the Owens Valley and my tribal community out here. But, writing a paper wasn't necessarily giving back to my community. Not a lot of people are going to read through a thesis. So for me, the documentary was a way of giving back and to show that the knowledge that was shared with me wasn't just going to be for me and to help build whatever I could be in the future, but to give back, because this is something that people ultimately wanted from the Owens Valley and from here, was to create visibility because we are so erased from not only planning, but the histories of how Los Angeles is looked at. Developing protocols was big for the Aqueduct Between Us. And I feel within my future project, the Indigenous water planning, or developing Indigenous water plan, that developing protocols would be something that would need to happen in the very beginning and be able to take shape as the project developed. So protocols are very important, how to establish respect and the way we talk to each other and to prioritize land. And the last two that I learned through the Aqueduct Between Us and will be taking on to my next project is prioritizing building relationships that are not relegated to one-time projects. So oftentimes in planning, it's very specific to a one and done. And if we are reached out as Tongva folks in our homelands about water planning, it is very tokenizing. And oftentimes people will come and ask us for like a picture or some kind of our traditional ecological knowledge. And then, they disappear like Houdini. We'll never see them again. So that is something that I think Indigenous water planning really goes against is that norm of just a one-time project and that's that. And, not even to hear back from the people that you're working with. That's something that Indigenous water planning wouldn't do. So we prioritize relationships that go beyond one-time projects. And lastly, we acknowledge and talk about power dynamics within our relationships. So with me, I understand that I wear a lot of hats. I'm a researcher, I'm an activist, I'm Tongva, but I do know that I'm also representing an institution, which is UCLA, and that I need to talk through those power dynamics with people that I work with. And I did that during the aqueduct between us. And I was learning as I was going, but now I'm seeing how powerful that is. And I need to prioritize that as I move forward with my current research, which is Indigenous water planning. So currently right now, my homelands is under, they're going through Alley River Master Plan time frame, which has been a 4-year planning process. And during this process, Indigenous people have been really erased from being able to shape the future of what river revitalization could look like. In this 4 years of planning, only one event was held to, I guess, listen to what Indigenous people wanted for the river. And it wasn't like a regular listening session where the county comes in and asks you questions. It was very performative where we were actually on stage at the Autry Museum. And, to me, that doesn't represent true engagement and true respect for our sovereignty, where we totally lacked any decision-making authority. So with the frustration that came with that 4-year planning process and, constantly being on the activist side of things, of pushing for us to be recognized, I saw the need to develop our own plan where our vision and our way of thinking about the river would not be an afterthought or something to be performed out. And that's where I'm at to in my program right now, is starting to think about planning for the Paimepa Heights and to develop an Indigenous water plan for the Alley River, which its original name is the Paimepa Height, which translates in Tongva to the West River. And, already that's putting the Alley River in relationship to the other rivers in my homelands, which a lot of people do not know. There's 4 sacred rivers in the Alley Basin, and the Alley River is just one of the channelized rivers that I focus on right now. And my current research is guided by 3 questions. What is the Tongva vision or guiding principles for planning for the Paimepa Height? How do Tongva community members understand their shared and communal responsibilities about the river? And third, how does the Tongva community build broader community support in Los Angeles to carry out their vision for their ancestral waters? So I know my presentation wasn't typical science one, but I wanted to share that we have so many political barriers to get to the point where we're able to do projects and to really be taken seriously as decision makers in our own homeland. So thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. That was a great talk. And you're totally fine. The talk is great when it bridges those gaps between implementation, projects, planning, and the science. Because we could have science all day long, but if we don't have the right planning in place where we're bringing in all the community and all the partners, then it falls short. It doesn't mean anything. So I think that's a great point. We do have a question for you here. My audio is a bit messed up. How about now? Can you hear me now? Okay. So the question we have for you is, thank you for your talk and all the work that you do. And this question loves that you brought up talking about power dynamics. Do you have any suggestions for those that want to do that in their work but don't know where to start? I hope you're able to hear that. My audio is still bad, apparently. I'll try to fix it.
I'm sorry, I couldn't really hear that, but I'll look really quick into the chat. I'm sorry, I didn't.
I can repeat the question.
Okay, thanks again.
And it was for me, full disclosure. Thanks so much for your work, Anne-Marie. And I really love that you brought up talking through power dynamics. I think that's something that we need to normalize and do more. But I think for a lot of folks, it can be intimidating. And just wanting to get your thoughts on or suggestions for those, emerging academics like yourself, or even, agency folks or anyone in between, to start those discussions and make space for that when they really don't know where to start.
Yeah, I think that, in the future, there should be a mechanism requiring you to do that, so then it won't seem so awkward and unnormal. But I think because I have such great love and respect for my Paiute relatives and my own people that, like, I put myself out there. There's no handbook on how to do these things, even though I probably will write something in the future about how to overcome that. But I think as long as you are prioritizing the health of the water and to really push yourself to become a good relative to the land and water, that things like that, our ego, our fear starts to melt away, because you start seeing yourself as a part of this bigger system, and that there's no room for that kind of thinking. It's about being humble and to have the humility to be like, you know what, there are these power dynamics, but I understand that what you have to offer is as valuable as to what I have to offer. And I want true collaboration in any project that I'm working on. And once, you come with the humble heart, you'd be surprised how many Native folks really can see that and will want to work with you even more. And you could bypass a lot of the distrust, because I know the people from where I'm from, we're kind of afraid to work with people because we've been burned in the past. But, as we move on to this era of planning and thinking and, really confronting the climate change, that we need to prioritize the relationship with land and water and, let that fear melt away. And I don't know if that's helpful, but that's just how I had to look at my interactions with folks.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks, Anna. Does my audio sound better? I did have a follow-up question to that one you just asked, Anne-Marie.
Yeah, it sounds better now.
Okay, good. I did some quick spring cleaning in fall. Okay, great. Thanks. So I had a question about that, because you did mention that, you want to establish relationships and partnerships for the longer term, not just for these patchwork short-term projects. And it's really disheartening when, you're working with someone and then they just drop off the planet, or they drop off, you don't hear from them again, and you want to establish those long-term relationships. As someone that's worked for agency, and I'm not tribal, but we're trying to bridge these gaps and have these relationships on projects and just overall programs that will last forever. I feel like I'm bugging folks, or I'm being too insistent, or, maybe they're just not interested and I'm being annoying. And so, sometimes, and again, this doesn't apply to every single person, and everybody just has different styles for working. And I feel like I'm veering into some of our panel topics. So you can have a quick response here so we can go on to Dr. Beth and Ada. But I'm always looking for assurance when I'm trying to reach out to tribal partners, future partners, or current partners, and just make sure that I'm still, extending that olive branch, not being offensive and not being annoying at the same time, right?
I think that that's a normal way to feel. I feel that a lot of people within my homelands, because we're a very small group of people that, maybe we're not as responsive as maybe, it would make you comfortable in being. But I think that it's so important that even if you do kind of feel annoying, that, you are showing that you're a good ally, that you are, going to be on top of these things, even if it does seem like you're a little bit out there nagging a bit. But, I know for me personally, I love when our allies are keeping us in the loop, and maybe I can't respond back because, we're very much under-resourced. As long as we have the chain of information and emails that, you're going to help us when the time comes, and that, when we are at that impasse to, participate in a project or to have questions, that you are the person to go to, and you've shown that time and time again. So I would say don't feel that way, and to just keep doing the right thing and being persistent with sharing information with tribal communities.
Great. Thank you so much for that. Up next, we have Dr. Beth Rose Middleton from UCD, Ada Stevenson, California Indian Water Commission, talking about building understanding across worldviews to increase recognition of tribally specific beneficial uses. And after this, we will be going into the panel, but feel free to drop any questions you guys have in the Q&A box here. And we won't take like a break, but we'll just take a transition after your guys' talk. So yeah, take it away. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you so much for having me and having us. I apologize for the typically long academic title, but it really gets at what I hope to talk about today, which is building understanding across worldviews in the beneficial uses context. My name is Beth Rose Middleton. I'm a faculty member in the Department of Native American Studies at UC Davis. I've been there about 11 years. And I'm Afro-Caribbean and Eastern European, born and raised in Northern California in Miwok homelands. So I just followed two amazing panelists. I really appreciate and acknowledge Sarah Ryan's knowledge about beneficial uses. She went over much of the context, so I'm going to focus more on the collaboration. And then Anne-Marie's talk was wonderful, really bringing to mind a lot of important aspects of collaboration. So I have been following the beneficial uses work for a number of years and teaching my classes about it. And just this last year, I got the opportunity to work on pushing for acceptance, adoption of tribally specific beneficial uses. And I'm very excited to work on this because I see it as a very significant environmental injustice issue due to very much this last point. Once a beneficial use is recognized, water quality objectives build on that recognized beneficial use. And if there isn't a recognized beneficial use, that means some people, particularly Indigenous people and subsistence fishers, are left unprotected. So these are some of the examples of the statewide beneficial uses. And the fact that Indigenous beneficial uses are not included here is an environmental injustice. As many of you know, I'm sure, EJ, the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people, it has specifically in respect to environmental regulations and policies with both the distribution of benefits and harms and the ability to participate in processes that set environmental regulatory standards. And Indigenous environmental justice is particularly specifically attentive to settler colonial structures, institutions, processes, practices, epistemologies that are constitutive of ongoing deep environmental injustice. So it's a different lens on environmental justice that foregrounds settler colonialism. And some of the ways this is expressed in this sphere are unequal exposures, unrecognized culturally specific exposure pathways, and generally lack of protection for Indigenous peoples within their homelands. So Sarah Ryan talked about some of the process. I have been watching this process, showing my students the hearings as tribal members advocated and tribal staff advocated for recognition of tribally specific beneficial uses. One of my colleagues, Fraser Schilling in Environmental Science and Policy, conducted a tribal fish use study in collaboration with one of our students, April Negrete, who's Tamoic Western Shoshone, and others. And it set out to quantify tribal fish consumption throughout the state. And I'll speak very briefly, I got a timer going so I don't take too much time, but I'll speak briefly on why this is a challenge, particularly in a university tribal relationship. But the goal of his project and also of the projects I'm working on is to address environmental injustice, particularly Indigenous environmental injustice, and to protect the health of tribal members. His study was modeled after a previous study done by the Columbia River Intertribal Fish Commission, and we are drawing on his study as we develop our survey tool to use to advocate for adoption of tribally specific beneficial uses on waterways in Region 5. So coming from UC Davis, building this collaboration with California Indian Water Commission, I find myself really thinking a lot about navigating the research space. I think Sarah Ryan spoke very powerfully about tribally led research, monitoring, engagement with citizen science. So the question there that comes up is, what is the role for university partners? And I feel that I'm in a bit of a unique position in Native American studies. Previously, it has been engagement with environmental science and policy, fishery sciences, toxicology, ecology around these questions. So I'm excited to kind of bring this dialogue into NAS and engage some of our students in this work. And also, how do we participate in supportively and respectfully moving research, the results of these different studies on toxicology and pathways, exposure pathways, to policy to protect people's health broadly? But these are kind of open questions in terms of the role of university partners, especially alongside and supportive of tribally led research. These are the beneficial uses that were recognized yet not adopted around the state that Sarah showed earlier. This is the project I'm working on with California Indian Water Commission and others in Region 5. So we're really addressing the fact that although these beneficial uses were recognized, they have not been applied. And so what does it take to apply them? This is a diagram that my student advisee who's in public health, Tamara Solorzano, made. And basically she's diagramming out the process as we are understanding it in order to engage with the basin planning process and advocate for the cultural and subsistence tribal beneficial uses. One thing that I added here that's really important is that the relationship building and communication should take place first and throughout this whole process, not only in one consultation period. And this really came out in our last meeting with the California Indian Water Commission and other partners, that this needs to be foregrounded. And we're also hopefully contributing to advancing how the process itself takes place. Just again, noting the importance of tribal specific beneficial uses. This is work by my friend, Dr. Kari Marie Norgard up at University of Oregon. And again, the way to insert, or a way to insert tribal values into the water quality regulatory process, but a process that's not without its challenges. These are some of the ongoing concerns. Who is doing the data gathering to support protection of tribal values and interests? If it's tribal staff and tribes, that's probably the best possible scenario. But what about situations in which that may not be possible? Is then a partnership appropriate with the university entity? These are some questions. One thing that is really concerning, I think, to me as well as many others, is the length of time the process takes in order to document fish use, fish consumption, and to do the fish tissue studies. All that time that takes place, multiple years, pollution continues, exposure continues, health disparities continue. And then also, once there's acceptance of the beneficial use and accompanying water quality standards to protect it, what about the enforcement? Briefly, these are some elements, a draft of our research collaboration ethic. Anne-Marie talked about humility. That's central for us as well. And this is a draft, I would say, that my students and I developed also for our Keepers of the Flame Fire Initiative, which is separate, but some similar principles. And in this case, descriptions of an understanding of water and water life differ between traditional practitioners, university researchers, and state policymakers. So our team is focused on respectful listening to build a collaborative project. Reciprocity is key, and also the responsibility that comes with learning about the ongoing impacts on water quality and Indigenous health throughout California and beyond. So I'm speaking fast. I don't want to take up too much time. This is my last substantive slide, but this is where we are in terms of building communication between California Indian Water Commission and UC Davis, researchers in Native American studies, fisheries sciences, and environmental science. So really finding the common terms by which we can communicate about the water, the fishery, and pathways of contamination. Developing a shared understanding of the scope of the project and our goals, engaging in some mapping of different waterways to determine where we focus, slowly developing a survey tool. And there are going to be multiple tools depending on who's doing the research, if it's a tribe, maybe a nonprofit, or us as a university collaborating with a tribal organization. We're in communication with State Water Resources Control Board to make sure we are generating the information that will feed into the process in order to get these beneficial uses adopted. So we're in the process of developing a research ethics agreement. I think that will be our key next step, kind of the terms of collaboration, figuring out which waterways we focus on, continuing to build relationships between our two entities as well as more broadly, finishing the survey or the data gathering instrument about fish consumption, gathering information, developing the report, and then we'll shift to the second phase, which is looking at the fish tissue studies on the species of focus. So that's where we are, and briefly, I hope this gave a sense of kind of the challenges, the opportunities, the scope of building this collaboration between UC Davis and the California Indian Water Commission. Now I'll hand it off to Ada Stevenson.
First of all, I want to talk about the public outreach, and we talked about the TEK panel. Public outreach seems to have failed miserably here in the state of California, United States, when it regards to federal agency wanting to provide outreach to tribal or indigenous communities. And we see that now, and it had just rolled over generational failure, I would say. And not only are we talking about tribal communities, we're talking about tribal families in a waterway system. They may be even just one family or one person, and that does not negate the importance of water usage. So we want to stress that when we're going out into the land. And I would like to tell the scientists that are going out to perform these outreach works, just federally recognized tribes have two categories of government. One is, okay, I just want to let all the scientists and people that are going out and studying the field, that just because they contacted a tribal elected official does not mean in any way that is a traditional person or someone who is fishing and living off water and land, because they're two very, very separate categories of people. And I know that in order to be on tribal land, that you need to notify people because you would like to remain on land and waterways. But we have many neighbors that who don't believe or won't participate in outreach. And for many of them is BLM, UCFS, is the Federal Forestry, Department of Water, Wildlife, Park Service. Not all of those are bad people. It's just that they don't understand the concept of consultation. They don't understand, in general, the beneficial uses of water, lands, and plants. So what's a better way to do that? Put up a no access land, a bar, or something that we can't get through. Therefore, we don't have access to traditional gathering items. And like we would always say, that water does not belong to anyone. And I think that many things that the tribes have to overcome when we talk about wanting to study water and asking people to come in and assist them is that we have a great mismanagement of water here in California. We have illegal water diversions here in California, and we have reams and reams of paper water. So as tribal communities, we're usually left out of that debate and that selling of water. And like I said, it is dangerous for us to get out there. And so we want, when people come out to study or to be partners with them, we want them to be safe as well. And we talk about nonverbal use, the power of nonverbal and verbal words. Not all tribal lands during water discussions need to be addressed, but asking information about traditional water and tribal acknowledgement is pretty respectful, but allow that to be given by tribal consent. Do not offend us by telling us our own stories, but rather let us as caretakers divulge to you the story of our water. We need to keep our water and fish healthy, and what better way to do that than tell you the history of that water rather than be dependent on the 4 to 6 weeks you may be studying it. No one knows that water, that land, and those vegetations better than the people that live on them and the people that use it for subsistence. But together as a team, I think that we can build a layer of trust and responsibility And we want it to be treated with respect rather than to become subject matter. And that's very common. I don't know how that happens, but we end up being the subject matter rather than our water. I also want to talk about some of the dynamics out on the land. Some of the people that you will run into will be elected officials, tribal elected officials, and then you'll have everyday people who are just curious, and then you'll have traditional people who want nothing to do with you, and they hold the most knowledge. But they have years and years and generations of mistrust built, and they know the stories. And we think of the visibility they receive. Most of the tribal traditional people who know the water and the land do not want to be pictured. They do not always want to be quoted. They don't want to be seen, although they hold that knowledge. And so that's why trust is so indispensable when you're out in the field. We talk about, in fact, there will be no equality between traditional practitioners and scientists. There never can be. And by the way, what is the congressional trust responsibilities of state and federal agencies and universities toward Indigenous people when they capture our information? Where does the information go? What database? Who has access and who has control or ownership of that information? Tribes that offer information about traditional knowledge want to know who holds that knowledge for the next 50 years, next 100 years. We're talking about water, long-term water planning, because it's going to affect us out in the field, but not the scientists that come out and visit and take samples and go back and become and write papers about it. We live here 365 days a year, 24 hours a day, and nothing can change our relationship between our water and our land and our fish and our trees. We see the demise of it every day. We see that recreational and agricultural and cattle folks seem to have the power, all the power here in California. And Indigenous people are not even in the discussion. And those that come out, the scientists that want to come, they still want to study water and talk about the molecular structure of water and plants and its relationship. They really need to come out more than the few times that they do. And they need to come out in different times of the year. And they need to talk to different people in those times of year. And I think that you should take into consideration when you come out on the land that many of us attend ceremonies. We are not available to speak to anyone. We are not allowed to have contact with people on the outside. So that's very important for scientists when you get ready to come out. You know, all of us, we don't have a man-made calendar. Of course we do for our work, but we go by a natural calendar. When the seasons change, we change. We have different responsibilities and duty. Therefore, that means our duty is responsibility to take care of the land and the water, trees, etc., becomes our priority. So, please don't be fed when you come out and you come out in the wrong time. It's a very simple rule. It's unwritten rule between tribal people, but apparently it must be written for those that come out in the scholarly world. I also wanted to state too that there are many.
So the CalSFS Fellows, this was our very first year for this fellowship program. We got funds for this program through the SFS Long Range Planning Committee. We did just apply to continue this project. And so far things look good, so we'll be able to have another round of fellows next year. So if anybody's interested in getting involved in CalSFS and being able to design activities like this or participate, learn about CalSFS, or you have a project that you want to do you think CalSFS would be able to help with, think about and consider becoming a CalSFS fellow, and we'll be opening those applications in January. And so stay tuned for our website, and I'll put the link in the chat box for everybody too. And I was going to add something else. So our fellows today, we have Fellows, can you turn on your video? I can see you. Okay. Okay, so we have William Oda is our fellow. We have Kyle Leathers here, Melissa von Mayhauser, and we have Robin Lopez too. Great. Okay, so thanks, fellows. So you guys are going to be moderating this part of the session, and then I'll be interjecting if there's any questions or follow-up questions or points or comments from the rest of the attendees. And do we lose Ada? Hopefully she'll come back because I want to have her participate and provide and finish her sentence. There was some stuff I was on the edge of my seat and then the audio cut out. Just like, what is it? So hopefully we'll get that back. All right, so let's go into fellows. We technically have 1 more minute. Oh, the clock just changed, so we're good. We're on time. So fellows, you guys are going to ask questions. Who is going first?
I believe that is me, and my question has already been partially answered in many ways by all of our wonderful panelists today, but we wanted to try and dig in a little deeper. So reaching out, building collaborations, speaking with tribal organizations seems to be a thing that all of us can and should be doing. And as I think it was Sarah pointed out, there are just so many different people across the state who you can be connecting with who have a deep knowledge about the local area. So what are things that maybe organizations like SFS and our California chapter can be doing to encourage our members to reach out and collaborate with tribes rather than sort of going it on their own or working through sort of the more traditional academic structures when it comes to researching local areas within our state? And that is open for anyone who would like to speak on the topic.
Well, I'd like to at least partially answer that question. Within the tribal EPA world, there are lots of opportunities to reach out to tribal governments, and locally there is I guess in Mendo Lake and Sonoma counties, the tribal environmental departments of the tribes, most of the tribes of that region, have been meeting monthly for well over 10 years on tribal environmental issues. We do collaborative projects together. We get speakers on issues of importance. We have different topics, like we have an emergency response, like sub-work group. The tribes in Lake County have been meeting quarterly since 2001 on environmental issues. So that's one place that you could reach out to, is just to find out if, as I mentioned in my talk, just, do some homework and research about the tribes of your area and see what tribal organizations are out there. And then also, checking with tribal organizations such as the California Indian Water Commission, the California Indian Environmental Alliance, Intertribal Council of California. These are all, those are a few tribal organizations that are, working on various projects and are also kind of a clearinghouse for what's going on in that region. In Southern Cal, there's a Native American Environmental Protection Coalition. I'm just talking about environmental ones. There's also Chairman's Association, Central California Chairman's Association, Southern California Chairman's Association. So there are, there's websites and activities that are going on, websites to check and activities going on with tribes. And then there's events that are occurring that, might be appropriate to reach out to, the organizers of those events. So I think those are, that's a good start, should be a good start.
If I could just add a little bit to that, thinking about that ethics slide that I put up, and also building on Sarah's slides with the maps, which I thought were really helpful, learning the context, whose homeland you're in, and then as Anne-Marie was talking about the settler colonial context and the layers of institutions that are impacting tribal homelands and lifeways, learning about that brings the responsibility to then really think about your work, your scientific work, your monitoring, your studies, and who it's for, and where it is going and what it's attempting to do.
Well, those are both really thoughtful responses, and thank you for providing those. I think I'm passing it off to Kyle who's up next.
Yeah. So I had a question about land acknowledgement. So I think Ada touched on a little bit in terms of the lack of commitment that's often found in working with researchers or collaborators where they don't take the time to go out there. Maybe land acknowledgement could be a first step. But I was wondering whether those words have power or non-power. And is it helpful or harmful to include tribal land acknowledgements in outreach or research products? And how do we make those efforts more impactful or meaningful if we do include them?
I've come from the land of tribal land acknowledgements that do not go farther than that. Los Angeles is pretty infamous of saying these things, but then not carrying out the relationship that goes along with acknowledging the history of our people, which, you know, caused the whole reason for having a land acknowledgement. What I do think is important is that within a tribal land acknowledgement is a step to beginning a relationship. So oftentimes, for example, Cal State LA wanted to do a tribal land acknowledgement, and they reached out to an elder, and they worked in collaboration with this elder for weeks at a time to actually come up with the tribal land acknowledgement. And within that process, a relationship was developed with the faculty, with the staff. And I think that was a very powerful move on Cal State LA's part to be accountable to the Indigenous people here now and to have Indigenous people define what those acknowledgements look like. And from that relationship, now the university has an elder on campus, an elder in residence that could, you know, be a part of decision-making in the future. So I think as far as just developing these tribal land acknowledgements, it's very important that you're going to go down that route to actually talk to the people whose homeland you are devising this land acknowledgement, not to just come up with one yourself.
Do either of the panelists, other panelists want to add to anything? Any, no? Okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
That was just really well said, Anne Marie. I think there's lots of, elements I think about with our campus in terms of land acknowledgement and going beyond the words and really considering deeply, our institution's impact and footprint and history, and then how we address that in present relationships and plans.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think you probably get different ideas talking to people that you couldn't find that's trying to do a Google search or what resources you could find online. So thanks, Anne Marie and Beth Rose. And then if anyone else has questions about my question or Will's question or different things throughout all of the talks, they can put those in the Q&A and Angela will help answer some of those at the end. I think I am passing it to whoever is next on the list.
We heard from Anacita Agustinez from the California Department of Water Resources yesterday and during many of your talks today about how essential it is to incorporate tribal participation and tribal ecological knowledge into policy, planning, and practice, but all while respecting tribal sovereignty. And so I'm wondering, how can freshwater research and management efforts be more supportive of ongoing tribal stewardship and monitoring efforts and responsive to questions and data needs that tribes have, while also honoring tribal sovereignty and rights?
I'm sorry, Ada is not on because she was making, I think, some really powerful points about where does the information go. And even when I think we as researchers or collaborators work with partners and construct agreements that recognize protection of Indigenous knowledge, that we also have to look at our institutions and our protocols as an institution that we fall within that may not be exactly the same as what we are developing with a community member. So making sure that, whatever agreement we develop is actually can be defended within our institution, I think is important too, because sometimes really good intentions may or may not actually protect Indigenous knowledge. So I would just say that the importance of developing agreements and making sure that you can back them up.
I think that's a really good point that you made about acknowledging those agreements. And I've noticed with just what's happening around Clear Lake that some of the discussions about the Clear Lake water quality and what's happening with the plants and animals here has been really sequestered with just like an educational institution. UC Davis is doing work, and we've had to work hard to get them to be, more open. Even though they've agreed to be more open, they're still building off of things that they're creating rather than the work that the tribes have done on Clear Lake. And that's hard to see because, the tribal cyanotoxin monitoring program is tribal centric. We will go out there and do water samples before ceremonies on the lake so that we can make sure that the tribes have the information. They're asking us to do that. And so to be tribal centric means that, those things there's a flexibility and an awareness of why we're doing this program and how and when we're doing this program. So for new programs to come in where it's not only building, it doesn't even acknowledge that there is a program. We've had that happen multiple times. I just think it's important to know what's already out there, and tribes may not be sharing all of, they'll be sharing the information that they think needs to go out. I know with our water programs, our elected officials at Big Valley really want there to be an understanding of how the water is being impacted by water management and land management decisions. So it's important to acknowledge that there are tribal programs and also there are tribal uses that aren't protected. I just want to give one example. I mean, just subsistence consumption is what. So we have a Superfund site on Clear Lake, the Mercury Superfund site, the Sulfur Bank Mercury mine, which Elam Indian Colony is right on. The people there are being impacted in so many different ways, not only from mercury, but and the methyl mercury in the fish, but also other mining contaminants. And to have cleanup goals in the TMDL that are based on sports fish consumption and to be looking at things from the uses that are not even the tribal traditional uses makes no sense to me. It's not right, because all uses of the waters of California are supposed to be protected. So I think it's important to support tribes in their efforts toward tribal beneficial use development as well, because then you'll actually have in the management and planning of what the regions are doing you'll have those tribal uses protected in it. Otherwise, you'll clean it up, but it's not even safe to eat one. It'll be safe to eat one fish meal a week, and that doesn't support tribal traditional consumption levels.
I wanted to follow up on Sarah, but I didn't want to if the other panelists had anything to add to that. I didn't want to interject before you guys. Okay, so Sarah, from the agency perspective, as when I started here, and Sarah, you've been here for 20 years doing work on the lake. And when I came in, I worked for county, so we worked with the tribes a lot, but there was nothing structured that would tell me coming in new to the system to reach out to others that are doing monitoring, let alone the tribes that are out there doing monitoring. So I think there's something systematic that, I think Anne-Marie talked about it earlier, like it'd be great if it was just a requirement. So it's, in the list of stuff that agencies have to do, and then they can't get around it, they can't oversee it, reaching out and seeing what's out there and what's already being done for it to be considered. And I'm learning still as we go and working with the tribes, learning a lot from the tribes and their monitoring efforts. And we make mistakes all the time. And, from that process of learning is, we can develop these relationships and work on these monitoring programs and making sure as soon as something new comes across our laps, we're like, oh, let's contact Sarah and let's see what's going on if they have any information to contribute to this, or if they want to be involved in this, or any of the other tribes, we try to do the same thing. And it's just automatic now, where when I first started in this little county agency, it was not automatic. And there was nobody here to instruct me, this is kind of what you need to do. And so we're trying, today's panel isn't going to solve all the problems, obviously, but if we can, plant this seed and make sure that this is a consideration for future scientists. And, when they start their careers and they're going, well, is this going to be on a tribal land? Is there tribes that are doing work like this already? What can we learn from them? What's the plant list here that has tribal beneficial uses that tribes use for this restoration project? If we can start that now and making sure that that's being considered for those that are starting out like I did in this little agency where it wasn't obvious to do that. And I don't know if that's very clear, but I just wanted to touch on what you said, Sarah. It's also great because you're very involved. So the feedback that you provide for someone like me that's still learning is awesome. And so I think that really helps too. And that's a testament to your program, your familiarity with the program, and all the work that you've been doing.
Looks like
You're up, Robin.
It looked like no more responses to that last question. Again, anyone who's tapping in, please feel free to drop your questions in the chat and we'll help facilitate those. Yes, my name is Robin Lopez, one of the Cal-SFS fellows, tapping in from the Ohlone territory in Richmond, California. And first and foremost, thank you panelists for being here and for allowing us the opportunity to learn from you and to digest everything that we're hearing today and how we can move forward with that. This question, I think Anne-Marie and Beth kind of got on the surface level with Kyle's previous question about land acknowledgement. But I want to kind of push it a bit forward at this intersection of perhaps post-colonial theory and ecological knowledge, and diving really into the fact that many of our institutions that we operate with are alongside, they carry immense amount of responsibility. And so the question getting to how do we hold these institutions accountable for past impact or effects that have holdovers to this very day? And what does it mean or look like to go beyond just the land acknowledgement and into critically building and sustaining relationship with the land and water? And I ask that also from a very biased and personal perspective, having connection to my Indigenous elders and ancestors down in Mexico, where there is a very innate sense of connectivity to the land and water. And so I'm curious to hear from hopefully all our panelists, what did that look like? And in the scope of when we're working with institutions or state and federal entities.
Oh, I guess I'll go first. That's a very heavy question. I think everybody, especially all the tribes throughout California, could give you a different answer. And all I could really speak on is how tribes are treated in here in Los Angeles. We have a state policy that recognizes our sovereignty to be consulted on water projects, and time again within the city, that is completely ignored and disregarded. In fact, we are oftentimes just looked at as stakeholders, if we're even looked at that. So I think within the time frame that I'm thinking through and seeing what's going on in the ground and actually being a practitioner, I used to be a practicing planner, and now I'm, dedicated myself to really putting school first, is that I left city politics feeling very defeated, and that there had to be different ways to work outside of the institution in order to get some of our theories and some of our value systems to be recognized. And in a place like LA, I think where I really feel that it's important to fight this battle is one of cultural values and hegemony, and making sure that my people's worldview and values and relationship to land is something that can be digested by everybody who calls Los Angeles home, because we should be the main hegemonic force that is defining how people are interacting with land and water. Because I don't think the city prioritizes relationality. In fact, they prioritize development of the Alley River to bring in more housing, which leads to gentrification, which leads to homelessness. And Indigenous values were against bringing in that type of development. What we're really trying to prioritize is river revitalization, but we're kept from those conversations. So I answer this feeling kind of like I have to understand how the institution runs, but also knows that all the answers and solutions aren't in the institution, and where the power is with the people and influencing the people. And that's why I think that documentary work is so important. Right now, I'm working with the School of Ed to develop curriculum based off the documentary to educate younger people, and using the knowledge that I have learned from my elders to pass down to the younger generations. And I think that scientists need to realize that they could lend a helping hand with helping Indigenous people develop these curriculums, develop, I guess, mass media to help, influence people's relationship with land and water. Because the institution, as historically proven, doesn't value that and develop and, looks at sustainability not through the lens of an Indigenous perspective, where it's like, how can we bring up life? It's about economic sustainability and how could we, make more money and develop more projects. So long story short, I think that we have a responsibility to understand how the institution functions, but also realizing that it has its limitations and that we need to look towards our people and developing projects that are influencing, working class folks to be, to think like Indigenous people. Sorry, that's kind of long-winded.
Thank you, Anne Marie. I feel like that was a really powerful response, and there's no reaction button here, so I couldn't do the little clap emoji. But you mentioned education and curriculum development. I mean, I see from being in Native American Studies, a lot of times when we are teaching the intro classes, we have a lot of students who are very surprised, never heard really information about settler colonialism before and how it's institutionalized. And I think that, we see that across all age levels. There's really a deep lack of education about the context in which we live in California in particular, but also throughout the Americas. I've been lucky to work with Wintun Elder Pam Gonzalez, who's been advocating for teaching homeland history wherever you are, teaching about Wintun history or Putwin history where we are in Davis and elsewhere, and why isn't that history offered? Because that lack of that offering is a foundation for injustice and exclusion. I also think there's, and this kind of reflects some of what Anne Marie said as well, there's a need for developing more of a culture of partnership, respectful partnership. I see within the university and our quest to do research, particularly at a public university that's in the public interest, but a lot of the culture is often around, developing new knowledge, publishing that knowledge, patenting it sometimes. It's not necessarily broadly incentivized or supported or infused with the ethic of local collaboration or collaboration with the people whose homelands you're working within. I see some movement to change that. Particularly there's a system-wide advisory committee, Native and Indigenous Advisory Committee at UC now. There's an advisory committee at UC Davis, but there's still a lot of work to be done. Not only at the institution, but also with our funders who support research to ensure that, not only is it responsive to this kind of broad public interest, but very specifically in the interest of justice and in relationship to the peoples whose homelands we're within and who have been impacted by the development and operation of our various institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie and Dr. Middleton. Sarah, did you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, I guess from a different angle of, the state doesn't slow down. They're constantly making decisions, making assumptions, and moving forward on policy. And one of the things that we've been doing in terms of some of the advisory committees that I'm on have to do with the agencies being more transparent about their work. And it's, it's not the same. It's only one portion of what you're asking about. But I think it's really important to know, I mean, the state is going to be working through the tools and the policies and the laws that they have. And so that's going to continue. And I would, and they don't, and it would be great to, to get them to kind of redo, and they need to redo some of the things that they've based their programs on. On the other side of it, it's also good to, for that to be transparent, for those tools to be available to tribes and to the public, and for people to be engaged. So one of the things that we've done at Cal-EPA Tribal Advisory Committee is to have each of the boards, departments, and offices of Cal-EPA to do these deep dives into their programs. How do you find out about enforcement and compliance, and where do you find out where their monitoring data is, and what kind of presumptions do they have about and assumptions have they built into their programs? And I think that we should all be asking agencies and entities to unpack that so there can be better participation with it. Again, it's only one side of what you're mentioning, but I think it's important that the state continues on with its thing. All agencies are doing that, and they need to open it up a lot more. And when they start, when tribes are engaging with them, and tribal people are getting hired up into higher positions. I mean, the governor is a tribal policy advisor. I think she probably has a staff of like 5, or less. But it's something that it's a chance to build on that, because it's so important to get that tribal voice in there and to have tribal people be in the agencies themselves so that they can work through those ways to incorporate those values and needs and concerns and goals and objectives of the tribes in their programs.
Thank you, all three of you, for those very intentional, very thoughtful responses. And as you were all answering, it made me think of a comment and a question as a follow-up, in that kind of what Anne-Marie was alluding to is that folks who are of Indigenous background are not a monolith, and we should never be treated as such. In every region, every space, and every relationship, it's a different dynamic. And but that also intersected with something I used to hear from elders, and I've heard of recently again. The question is always, what kind of ancestor do you want to be remembered as in the work that we do? And it made me think, as I'm hearing from all of you, I think Anne-Marie hit the nail on the head earlier, that there needs to be a culture of consciousness, a change in that. And sometimes I think folks wait too late, and who are in privileged spaces, when they're in academia, and it needs to be something that happens much younger. When I'm talking about youth, and making sure this next iteration of future generations is aware and has that culture of consciousness change. And so I'm curious, have any of you ever done outreach work with young folks? And if so, like, what did that look like, if you're willing to share?
Okay, I'll go first. I have a 10-year-old, and I think that's when I really started to come into like my understanding of myself as a Tongva woman, was because I understood that it was so important to pass down values that weren't inherently capitalistic and, empty, as which the system gives us. And I really wanted to be able to pass them down a value system and a love for the land and water. So everything that I've done, whether it be the documentary work, is really for the future generation, is really to leave something to my son, to the next generation, to learn about water from an Indigenous perspective. Because here in LA, it's hard pressed to even learn about water in general, which is a sad thing, but it's also an opportunity to create materials that are indigenously led. And that's why, like I was talking about before, I have prioritized curriculum development and working with different sects and different organizations who want to build youth programs that integrate Indigenous knowledge into their programming. So I have done that work, and it's very fulfilling, and it's very exciting to see that young people get it, and they see they grow up in the climate catastrophe, and they understand the need to change the way in which we're thinking. And when you're younger, you're more able to understand how interconnected everything is, as opposed to when you're older and you're working several jobs and you're tired. So this is the time where, we really got to take our youth under our wing and teach them what we know. So.
Thank you for that. Anything to add, Dr. Middleton or Sarah?
I think a lot of my work with youth is more with students and in Native American studies and with ecology, creating respectful learning opportunities like our Keepers of the Flame initiative and students working on different projects, or really just hearing directly from elders and community members who are willing to speak to our classes. I think that I've seen that be transformative for people. And I'm also the mother of a 9-year-old. So some of my work has been advising educators of the elementary school population about what to include or what not to include in curriculum, so as not to perpetuate stereotypes and issues. We're dealing with that now in the 4th grade curriculum, but there have been some positive changes made, and there's also some really good examples of tribally developed curriculums out there as well.
At Big Valley, we have a Boys and Girls Club, and also some education programs, library programs. So we've been able to interact with, or in the last several years, we've been interacting through those programs and the Boys and Girls Club to do youth outreach, because that's how our administrator would like us to do things. So it kind of keeps things more organized and, I guess, tracked. So it's wonderful to do that, because, we already have sort of built in, people who will give us the limitations of, the timing and it's always wonderful. And we've come up with a variety of things based on what the children and the youth want to do. It's mostly younger ones. It is really, I found it hard to, keep the interest of the older ones who are in their early teens and mid-teens. So the younger ones are if one of the things that we've done is do shoreline walks where we can look at the plants and animals and talk about the things that they're seeing. As I mentioned, we've pulled out the microscope so they can look at it under the microscope, and a lot of people like that. There's just been, we had one youth who wanted to basically start taking pictures of all the Big Valley birds and all the Big Valley fish and all the Big Valley plants. And so our hope is to make some posters based on that, with that youth led the things that are important to them. And so it's really just about listening and finding ways to finding the things that they're interested in. And technology is a big one. So we're hoping to have some apps and some tools that are things that they want to use. And we're working with them to develop that. But listening is a big one, most important.
Thank you very much. And there sounds like there's a lot of parallels with working with youth and also working with tribal ecological knowledge. It all seemed to be rooted in just learning how to take a step back and listen. Appreciate all of you for your responses. I'm going to pass the baton back over to Angela.
Thanks, Robin. Great questions. I did want to have a question. I think, Dr. Bethan, you may know this, but is there, it's been like 20 years since I graduated high school and then after undergrad at Sac State after that, but is there a requirement that you know of, at least for UCs and maybe not CSU, but in California, to include their, like, for general ed requirements for undergraduates, for ethnic study or North American studies or Indigenous studies? Is there a requirement for that, or is that still just part of it's a suite of classes that one could choose, but they have an options of classes that they could choose from and from that required panel? Is that still the case?
So from what I know, we have these general ed requirements, and one category is domestic diversity, but that can be met through a whole variety of classes, certainly not limited to the different ethnic studies departments. So that is an issue. We have been advocating for a requirement to take an ethnic studies course, and we don't have an ethnic studies department, we have different individual departments, or a requirement to take a Native American studies course. Now we're really working with Pam Gonzalez and others to develop this Homeland History course and require some element of that be taught all across the university so that people know where they are and the history of this place. But as of right now, not yet required.
Okay. We'll let CalSF know if there's any way we can write a letter or do anything or support. We definitely would throw our support and SFS behind that, because it's all related, as we talked about, today throughout the panel and the session, and it would be a great asset to be able to have that and be a requirement. And I know we were talking about youth before undergrad, but having that, requirement at the undergrad level, I think would obviously be super beneficial and totally get at things that we're talking about today. I did want to let you guys know that before we had this session, I reached out to SFS Parent Society and did ask them. I wanted to ask them some information about what they're doing with either TEK or how do they track their tribal membership. Just because it's something, as a chapter, we're trying to reach out. We want to have more diversity, inclusivity. We want to be welcoming, and we want to create a membership that's everybody and made for everybody. And so starting that to see what's available from the national SFS was one of the things that I wanted to figure out, what they've been doing, what's been successful, and what our general membership makeup is. They're still getting me the data, so it's something that hasn't been tracked well. So that's something automatically that we know, but also that they reached out to me to let me know that they are leading an SFS program to create long-term partnerships with tribal colleges. So it's a strong vision right now, and they're developing that, but that's something that SFS is doing. And I am going to reach out for them and see if there's a place that CalSFS can play in that, because I think that was one of our goals as a chapter, is we wanted to incorporate more tribal members into our chapter. And so that might be an avenue to do that, so we can get those voices in the chapter as we're moving forward. So I also have, I think there was a couple questions. Oh, and then if you guys have been noticing, Anna, thank you, Anna, has been posting links into the chat for all the folks. So like, for example, Sarah Ryan talked about the Calipe Tribal Advisory Committee, and the link is provided in the chat for that. So as panelists have been mentioning programs, or there's programs of the state that are relevant, Anna has been putting those in the chat. So thank you, Anna, for doing that. And she also posted the recent requirement for California high schools. And did you look at that, Anna? Does that have any sort of ethnic studies or Native American requirements?
Hey, y'all. Yeah, so that was signed, I think, earlier last month to require all California high schools to offer and have ethnic studies as a graduation requirement. So relatively recent, it's not implemented yet by any means, but just it was relevant to the conversation. I was trying to do it quietly, so I didn't take up time, Angela.
Sorry, we had a little bit of time. I had to spot you out, so thank you. Anna's great. She's behind the scenes. She's been keeping up with the conversation, adding stuff, so I had to highlight her and put the spotlight a little bit there. But that's great. So thanks for the information. That's good to know. We did have one question, more like a comment, I guess. Somebody wanted to make sure that it was mentioned, and it must have been by something that Sarah, you pointed on, that early coordination, collaboration, consultation is the best method to establish and develop good, respectful working relationships with tribal governments, communities, organizations, and groups. And this can include scheduling to attend, present at annual, quarterly tribal council meetings. And this is especially true of state, local educational facilities, potentially of projects within those tribal jurisdictions, currently or in the future. But early is the key here for getting those relationships established, and transparency, communication, and what folks and agencies are doing. So I don't know, Sarah, if you wanted to touch on any of that. It was looks like it was mentioned something that you had talked about.
Yeah, that's such a good point that Carolyn made. And, it's just like doing an environmental review. If you do it at the very end when everything's been decided that this is how the project's going to go, then what's really the point of doing an environmental review to some extent? Tribes should be a part of the planning of programs that are going to impact them. I think that the Governor Brown's B1011 declaration requires that anything that is going to impact tribes, that they should have meaningful input and an ability to help develop that and to help be a part of it. Otherwise, it's going to be all reaction, and reaction is really, it's expensive in terms of people's energy and their time, and it's exhausting. So it's much better, and you get so much better of a program if tribes are engaged from the get-go. What are their issues? What are the things that they're seeing? How do they, what have they seen change? What's being impacted? Those are the things that I think any, if you're managing land and water, you should be thinking about those things. If you're doing research, I think it was brought up earlier. Why are you doing that research? What is it that tribes can get from that? What are the things that they want to say about that? You will just have a much better, more enhanced, more robust, enriched end product if tribes are engaged from the get-go, and just do your homework to find out which tribes those are. And it might not be, if you look in the phone book or you look online, you might not see a tribal office in your county, but as in the map that I showed earlier, they're everywhere. There are Native peoples all, throughout California who have a claim and an interest and a concern about every square inch of this place. So be engaged and do your homework. Get them involved if they want to.
Great, thank you. Did any of the other panelists or fellows want to comment on that? Anything else? Okay, so I have one more question. This is left over from earlier from Sarah's, and this will be kind of the last question. It's a little different, but it's for each of you guys. And the question is, which water pollutant is most significantly affecting traditional cultural subsistence of California tribes? And I bring it up because we have kind of a regional diverse panel here. So we have somebody, we have a student, we have a educator, professor, and we have somebody that's working on, implementation management here. So I like the diversity. And so I think the different perspectives of answers to this. And I know it's like one pollutant, there's like so many, and maybe there's, ignorance is a pollutant. I don't know. But so, I want to just kind of explore this a little bit as our last question for this panel. And yeah, so let's see what you guys got for this one.
Well, I'm happy to jump into that one. So it is hard to narrow it down to one, and I, in Clear Lake, we're looking at 4. We're looking at bacteria, so E. coli that's impacting people, and that's coming from all sorts of sources. It's coming from septic systems. It's coming from sanitary sewer overflows. It's coming from runoff from ranches and agriculture that has manure for fertilizers. and houseboats. So that's one. Cyanotoxins, which is, the result of nutrient enrichment of a water body, which is coming from multiple sources. Let's see. Mercury. Mercury. So I understand that there are no water bodies in California where you can safely consume a traditional level of fish meals for a week. Like the mercury levels are so high, and the methylmercury levels in the fish are so high that there's my understanding, there's no places where you can eat 3 or 4 fish meals a week, and that's not even subsistence consumption there. So you can't not talk about mercury pollution and methylmercury in the fish when you talk about pollution. So I think those, and it really has to do with land management and land management decisions. So I would say those on Clear Lake, and I suspect those would be the case in many other places as well.
Thank you. So being more of a social scientist, I don't know if I can name a specific pollutant. I have spent a lot of time studying infrastructure, though, and the imposition of infrastructure on tribal homelands and waters. So I'm thinking of dams in particular, and how they exacerbate the impact of any existing pollutant. Dams as well as diversions. Because they lower the water level, which can lead to increased water temperature, which can lead to higher and concentrations of various pollutants, and a heightened impact on human health. So I'm going to recognize Joe Hostler here from Yurok tribe. I was talking with him about climate change once, and he said, well, how can we talk about climate change until we talk about these dams on the system and their impact on the river overall? So whether it's a pollutant or broader systemic change, I think the infrastructure plays a key role.
I definitely agree with Dr. Middleton about how infrastructure plays a key role out here in LA. Most of the river is channelized, so we don't even depend on the river for any type of drinking water. So, I mean, I can't speak to specific pollutants, but I will say that we are completely dependent on imported water. So we definitely need to clean up our own aquifers and become dependent on our local sources. And there is measures and money to start doing that kind of stormwater capture work. And, whether tribes will be involved is something that, will be documented and what our tribal community will push for. But as of right now, our water is polluted to the point where it is not useful to anybody.
Thank you for those responses. Did any of our fellows want to add anything to that before we wrap it up? And I did just do a call out, last chance for any of the attendees to ask any questions of the panels before we finish for the day. No, we're good. All right. Okay, so I think that's it. Thank you so much to our panelists and speakers. Thank you, Ada Stevenson, too. I'm sorry she couldn't fully participate. Her information she provided was wonderful and valuable. And thank you, Ada. Let her know for us, Dr. Beth, too. And is there any last parting words from our panelists today? Good. Okay, you guys said a lot. Thank you so much. Oh, Sarah, yes.
I just want to thank you, Angela, for putting this session together. And it was great to see my fellow panelists. And a shout out to Ada, who I know is not on the call, but she and I go way back, and she does great work. So just really great to hear her voice. And thank you for this.
Good. Thank you so much. So this will be, this is recorded, and it will be available on the Water Board YouTube channel. We also like to extract it and put it on our website or embed a link. And we have a website. We have our own standalone website, and we also have one on SFS. And then if there's anybody interested in partnering with tribes, Anna did put a link in the chat for the Office of Public Participation, Tribal Affairs. So that's a good step if you want to, reach out and explore the information at that link, and then share this panel with anybody also that you think might find it valuable and have information for you. And then again, thank you so much to the panelists for spending this time on a Wednesday to come and talk with us. It was a great discussion. I really appreciate you, all that you're doing, and your input. And thank you, fellows, for moderating. You did a great job. And thanks so much for contributing to CalSFS. Thanks to all the attendees. I'm not sure if Allie wanted to get on and say anything. We're ending like a little early. But if you want to say anything for the parting of CABW, or what do we have after? Just want to check with the...
Thank you all. Everybody's expressed a lot of gratitude, so I don't want to keep you all too much, but thank you all very much. Appreciate your time. That was a great discussion. We will be sending out a survey. Just let us know how this went, get feedback from everybody. I think Shuka's putting it in the chat, and then we'll also distribute that through email lists and all that good stuff. And then, yeah, the recording will be available. We'll do what we do and send a bunch of emails to you all to let you know where to find that information. And I think that's it as far as logistics. So again, thank you everybody for another great CABW SFS, and look forward to the in-person Thule boat demo next year, hopefully.
Can't wait.
It's gonna happen.
Yes.
All right, thanks everybody.
Thank you guys.